The order came down on a Thursday, in the flat voice the sergeant uses when a thing is already decided and grief is not invited into the room. Saturday, 1100. Honor party of 6. Funeral for one of ours. No family expected. He read it off the duty sheet the way he reads everything, and then he looked up, which he does not usually do, and let the last 3 words sit in the air a moment longer than the rest. No family expected. I had stood in that hall for 11 years, and I had never heard those words attached to a man we were to bury. I am Corporal Aldous Frayne of the Warden's Foot, and I have carried a great many things in white gloves, a standard, a wreath, a folded cloak, the corner of more than one coffin. We are trained to carry without trembling. The glove is not for warmth. It is so the hand never shows what the hand feels. I am telling you this at the front because the story I have to tell is about the one morning the gloves were not enough, and what we did instead. "Who is he?" Private Oxley asked. Oxley is young, and the young still ask the questions the rest of us have learned to read off a page. The sergeant slid the sheet across the table and let us see it for ourselves. A name, a service number, a regiment long folded into hours, the way old regiments fold into new ones until the cloth is all one color again. Date of enlistment decades back. Date of discharge honorable, with a notation beside it I had to read twice. And in the box marked next of kin, where a man's whole life of belonging is meant to be summed up in a line, there was a single word, typed, official, final. None. None, Oxley said. There's always somebody, a cousin. Read it, the sergeant said, not unkind. Just tired in the way men get when the world has handed them one more thing it should have handled itself. So we read it. The man had outlived a wife with no children. He had outlived the 2 friends listed years ago as people to contact. Both of them crossed through with little dated lines, because the office that keeps such records is thorough, and the years are not. He had spent his last seasons in a quiet home for old soldiers near the Eastern Marsh, a place called Graymore, and when he went the way the unlucky go. In his sleep, owing nothing, owed a great deal, with no one in the corridor to be told. The form did what forms do. It worked its way up a chain until it reached a desk that recognized the old regimental mark, and that desk, to its credit, did not simply file him into the ground. It sent the matter to us. An honor party, 6 men, a service, the proper rights for a man who had worn the cloth. And no family expected. I want to be honest about what I felt, because the honest thing is the only thing worth telling. I did not feel grief, not at first. I had never met him. What I felt was a kind of cold offense, the way you feel when you see a fine thing left out in the rain. Here was a man who had given his years to the same colors I wore, and the world had arranged for him to be lowered into the earth with no hand to grip the rope but ours, and no eye to watch but the duty rosters. It is one thing to die. Every man does. It is another to die and have the box marked none. "We'll do it right," I said. I had not meant to say anything. The sergeant looked at me. "We always do it right, Corporal." "I know, Sergeant. I mean, we'll do it right." And I could not in that moment have told you what I meant by the difference, only that there was one, and that by Saturday I would understand it. That night I could not let it go. I have a habit when something sits wrong of pulling the thread to see where it leads, and I pulled this one. The duty office keeps the old service files, and a corporal with a clean record and a reason can ask to see them. I asked. The clerk, a careful woman named Dell who has seen every kind of soldier come through her ledgers, found the man's folder and set it on the counter between us with both hands, the way you set down something you have decided to respect. "You knew him?" she asked. "No," I said, "that's the trouble." She understood that. People who keep records understand it better than most. They spend their lives turning men into lines, and now and then a line refuses to lie flat. She let me sit at the side table under the lamp and read. I will not pretend the file was full of glory. It was full of service, which is a quieter thing. He had enlisted as a boy. the way they used to let boys enlist, and he had done the years no one writes songs about, the cold postings, the long watches, the work of holding a line that no enemy ever tested because men like him were holding it. There was one notation, the one I had read twice on the duty sheet, that explained the honorable discharge. An injury, taken not in any famous action but in a flood on the eastern marsh, when a river took a village in the night and the garrison was sent in with ropes. He had gone back into the water 4 times. The 5th time the water did not let him keep the use of his left hand, and a soldier who cannot fully grip a rifle is, by the regulations, no longer a soldier. They thanked him. They gave him the notation. They sent him to Graymore with a small pension and the medal you get for nearly drowning to pull strangers out of a flood, and the world, having extracted everything useful from him, marked his next of kin none and moved on. 4 times back into the water. I sat with that under the lamp until the lamp seemed the only warm thing in the building. When I gave the folder back to Dell, she asked, in a voice that did not quite trust its own question, "What will the service be like? For a man with no one?" "The proper rights," I said, 6 men, a chaplain. The cloak, the volley, the words. She nodded slowly. "And the chapel, who fills the chapel?" I had no answer for that. The proper rites do not require a full chapel. They require 6 men and the forms done correctly. A man can be buried with full honor into an empty room, every motion exact, and it will all be technically, completely, unimpeachably right. I walked back to the barracks the long way, past the dark practice yard where we drill the slow march until our legs forget how to hurry, and I thought about the box marked none, and the 4 times into the water, and the empty chapel that would be entirely correct. And somewhere on that long walk between the yard and the gate, the cold offense I had carried since Thursday turned into something with a shape. It was not enough to do it right. We were going to fill the chapel. I did not yet know how. I knew only that a man who went back 4 times for strangers was not going to be lowered into the ground as a stranger himself, not while the cloth he wore still had men inside it who could stand. I went to find the sergeant. He was in the orderly room with his boots off and his glasses on, which is the only state in which a sergeant is briefly a man and not a rank. He did not look up from the roster he was building. "Frayne," he said, "it's late for the slow march. I want to talk about Saturday." "Saturday's arranged. 6 men. You're one of them. Wear the dark, not the scarlet. It's a funeral, not a parade." He turned a page. "Go to bed." "Sergeant, the box is marked none." His pen stopped. He did not look up, but the pen stopped, and I had been under him long enough to know that a stopped pen was as good as a turned head. "I read the sheet," he said. "Then you read what he did. The flood, 4 times into the water." I set the thing down between us the way Dell had set down the folder, with both hands, deciding to respect it. "We're going to put a man who went back 4 times for strangers into the ground in an empty room and call it honor because the angles are correct." "The angles are honor," he said, but there was no iron in it. He was a soldier, and the regulations were his bones, but he had buried more men than I had, and somewhere in all that burying he had kept the part of himself that knew the difference between a thing being correct and a thing being right. "What is it you're asking me, Corporal? Say it plainly. I'm too old for the long way round at this hour." So I said it plainly. "Next of kin. The box wants a next of kin. It's empty because the world spent him and threw the wrapper away." I felt my voice do something I did not give it permission to do, and I let it. "He has a regiment. We are his regiment. I'm asking that we stand as his family, not 6 men doing the forms, the whole barracks that can be spared. We fill the chapel. We grip the rope. When the chaplain asks who receives him, somebody answers. We answer." For a long moment the orderly room was very quiet, just the small tick of the wall clock that has counted out more watches than any of us will live. "It's not in the regulations," the sergeant said at last. "No, Sergeant. There's no order for it. I can't make an order out of a feeling." "No, Sergeant." He took his glasses off, which is the reverse of putting them on, and rubbed the 2 red marks they leave on the bridge of an old soldier's nose. "Then it can't be an order," he said. "An order, men obey because they must." They'd come and they'd stand, and half of them would be thinking about their dinner because that's what men do when they're made to stand somewhere. He looked at me then, finally, and his eyes were not tired anymore. "It has to be an ask. You understand the difference? An order fills a room with bodies. An ask fills it with men. You want the chapel full of men, Frayne, you can't command it, you have to ask it, and they have to be free to say no." "Then let me ask them." "It's your thread," he said. "You pulled it, you carry it." He put his glasses back on and bent again to the roster, and just as I reached the door he added without looking up, "Word the ask carefully. Tell them the truth and nothing prettier than the truth. A man who went back 4 times. A box marked none. And then let them decide what kind of men they are. That's all you do. You don't tug a single sleeve." He turned a page. "And Frayne, I'll be there. In the dark, not the scarlet, front rank. You can put that into your asking or leave it out as you judge." I left it out. I had a feeling I would not need it. The asking I did the next morning, in the long room where the relief shifts cross paths at the changing of the watch, which is the only hour the whole barracks passes through the same door. I did not stand on a chair or raise my voice. I am a corporal. I do not have the rank to summon men, and the sergeant had been right that summoning was exactly the wrong tool. So I simply stood by the notice board where the duty sheets hang, and as men came through I told them plainly the thing I had been carrying. I told them about the flood. I told them about the left hand that could no longer grip a rifle, and the notation, and the small pension in Graymore near the marsh. I told them about the box marked none. And then I told them what I wanted to do, and I told them the sergeant had said it could not be an order, and that I was not ordering, and that any man who walked on by had my full understanding, because it was a Saturday, and the world is full of Saturdays a man would rather spend almost any other way than at the funeral of a stranger. Then I stopped talking and let them decide what kind of men they were. The first to stop was an old color sergeant named Brask, who has a face like the back of a shield and a voice he saves for the parade ground. He read the duty sheet over my shoulder slowly, the way he reads everything, and when he came to the box he was quiet for a while. Then he said, 4 times into the water. Not a question. He took out the small notebook he keeps for matters he intends to remember, and he wrote a single word which I assumed was the man's name, and he said, "I'll be there. I'll bring the band, the ones not on duty. A man who pulled strangers out of a flood gets pipes, or I don't know what pipes are for." And he walked on before I could thank him, because Brask does not collect thanks. He files them away unopened. After Brask it was easier, and then it was not a matter of asking at all. Word does in a barracks what it does nowhere else on earth. It travels by some current under the floorboards, faster than any man can carry it, and by the noon meal I no longer had to stand by the notice board. Men came to me. A pair of farriers asked the time and the dress. 3 of the youngest privates, Oxley among them, asked if they could grip the rope, and I had to explain that there are only so many places on a rope, and that we would draw lots, and that there is no dishonor in standing in the rank instead of bearing the weight, and they nodded as if I had given them a gift, which in a way I had, the chance to be told they were needed. Quartermaster, a sour man who guards the stores as if each blanket were his own child, heard the thread by mid-afternoon and came to find me himself, which the quartermaster does for no man. "This soldier," he said, "Graymore, the flood." He had clearly done his own reading. "He'll want the full kit on the cloak, medals, the flood medal especially. You leave that to me, Corporal. I'll have it laid out proper, polished, every ribbon square. A man doesn't go into the ground with a crooked ribbon. Not on my store's watch." And he too walked off before I could answer, muttering about the state of the polish in the 3rd cabinet. By the time the sun went down on Friday, I no longer had a thread in my hand. I had a rope and 100 hands reaching for it. It was Friday evening that the trouble came, the way trouble does, not from an enemy, but from a desk. A message arrived from the household's ceremonial office, signed by an undersecretary named Pell, a man I knew only as a careful signature at the bottom of memoranda. The message was polite. It was also, in its polite way, a wall. It noted that the funeral on Saturday was for a discharged soldier with no surviving family and no standing within the present household, that the rites laid down for such a case were the 6-man honor party and the chaplain, and that, here the politeness thinned to a single cool line, it had come to the office's attention that a larger and unauthorized assembly was being organized. The office wished to remind all ranks that ceremonial occasions are governed by protocol, that grief is not a warrant for irregularity, and that the proper rites, correctly performed by the appointed party, were entirely sufficient to discharge the regiment's duty to the deceased. Entirely sufficient. I read those 2 words by the same lamp I had read the file under, and I felt the cold offense come back, harder now, because this was not the careless world spending a man and throwing the wrapper away. This was a man at a desk telling me that the wrapper had been disposed of correctly. I took the message to the sergeant. He read it twice, slower the second time, the way Brask reads. "He's not wrong," the sergeant said. "Sergeant, hear me, he's not wrong about the regulation. The 6-man party is the right. It is sufficient. If we did only that, no man could fault us." He set the message down. But a thing can be sufficient and still be a sin of the smallest kind, the sin of doing exactly enough and not 1 inch more for a man who did 4 inches more than anyone asked, 4 times over. He looked at the message as if it were a soldier standing crooked in the rank. Pell's afraid of a spectacle. He thinks a chapel full of men means a fuss, and a fuss means questions, and questions land on his desk. He's protecting the smoothness of his Saturday. Then we're forbidden. We're reminded, the sergeant corrected. Read it again, he reminds, he recommends. He has not, anywhere on this paper, given an order, because to give an order he'd have to put his name to forbidding soldiers from honoring a soldier, and even a careful man like Pell knows how that reads when it's read aloud in 20 years. He almost smiled. He's left himself a door. Men who write carefully always do. The question, Corporal, is whether you'll walk through it, knowing that if it goes wrong, it lands on you and on me and not on him. It won't go wrong. It might. He could make it cost you a reprimand, a blocked promotion, the small, slow punishments a desk can hand down for years. He let that sit. I won't pretend the cost is nothing. I'm asking if you've counted it. I thought about the box marked none. I thought about 4 times into the water with a hand that would never grip a rifle again. I've counted it, Sergeant. Then count it for them too. Every man you asked, they came freely, but they came not knowing there was a desk that frowned on it. That changes the asking. A man can volunteer for a kindness. It's a heavier thing to volunteer for a kindness someone's told you not to make a fuss about. You go back to them tonight. You tell them about Pell's message, every word of it, and you give every man the door back. Any who wants to step off now, steps off clean, and you and I never know his name. That's the only honest way to do this. So I did the hardest part of the whole affair that Friday night, harder than the asking had been. I gathered the men who had said yes. There were more than I had realized. The long room would not hold them, and we spilled into the corridor. And I read them Pell's message aloud, every careful word, including entirely sufficient, including unauthorized, including grief is not a warrant for irregularity. And then I told them what the sergeant had told me, that the desk frowned on it, that there could be a cost, that the cost might land on me and might. I would not lie, brush against any of them, and that any man who wanted to step off now should step off, with no shame and no record, because the asking had changed, and they deserved to choose again knowing the weather. I expected to lose some. I am ashamed a little that I expected it. Brask was the first to speak again because some men are made to go first. He had not put his notebook away. Unauthorized, he said, turning the word over like a coin he suspected was counterfeit. I've been in this cloth 41 years, Corporal. I have stood at the funerals of generals, and I have stood at the funeral of a drummer boy who never grew tall enough to reach the high drum. I have never once needed a desk's authority to honor a man who earned it. I needed the man to have earned it. This one earned it 4 times. He closed the notebook. I'll stand, and if the desk wants my name, it can have it. I've signed worse things for worse reasons. No one stepped off. I want to record that plainly, because it is the truest thing in this account and the part I least deserved. I gave 100 men a clean door out in the dark of a Friday, knowing it might cost them, and not one walked through it. Oxley, the youngest, said only, "He went back for strangers, Corporal. We're not even strangers. We're his regiment." And the corridor murmured its agreement low, the way men agree when they mean it and don't want to make a noise about meaning it. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark and listened to the barracks breathe around me. 100 men who had each, freely and knowing the cost, decided what kind of men they were, and I thought about the mourning and the chapel and the empty box, and I thought, it will not be empty. Whatever Pell's careful paper says, whatever it costs. The box marked none is going to be a lie by 1100 hours, and I am going to be the man who makes it one. Then I thought about the part I had not solved, the part no asking could fix, and the cold came back one more time. There was still the matter of the question. I had spoken with the chaplain on Friday afternoon, a quiet old man named Father Holt, who has read more soldiers into the ground than any of us, and I had asked him what the service required of those who stood for the dead. He had told me the order of it gently, the readings and the silences, and then he had come to the part that stopped me. Near the close of the rite, he said, there is a moment where the chaplain turns from the coffin to those gathered and asks the oldest question there is, whether the dead is received, whether there is any here who will receive him, will carry his memory, will stand as the family that lays him down. In an ordinary funeral, Holt said, the family answers. A son says yes, a widow, a brother. He had looked at me with eyes the color of old water. For this man, there is no one to answer. So I had planned to leave the question out. It is not in the regulation that I must ask it into an empty room. It would only be a cruelty to ask who receives him and have the silence answer. Don't leave it out, I had said, before I knew I was going to say it. He had studied me. Then who answers, Corporal? I cannot ask a question into a chapel and let it fall to the stone. That is worse than not asking. That is the box marked none spoken aloud in the house of the dead. And I had not known. That was the part the asking could not fix. I could fill the chapel with men. I could fill the rope with hands. But the question is not answered by a crowd. It is answered by a family, by someone who steps forward and says, yes, I receive him. He is mine to lay down. 100 men standing in respectful silence do not answer the question. They only make the silence larger. I lay awake with that until the dark went gray, and somewhere in the graying I found the shape of an answer, and I sent word to Holt before dawn by a runner, and I prayed, I, who pray rarely and badly, that he would agree. Before I tell you the morning, I have to tell you the drive, because the answer I found in the gray did not come from nowhere. It came from Graymore. I had gone out there on the Friday, in the hour I should have been sleeping, because I could not stand the thought of carrying a stranger, and so I went to make him less of one. Graymore sits where the land goes flat and the reeds begin, a low stone house with a long porch, the kind of place where old soldiers are sent to be comfortable and forgotten in roughly that order. A matron with kind, tired eyes met me at the door, and when I told her why I had come, she did a thing I did not expect. She took both my hands. You came, she said. Someone came. And I understood that she had not been sure anyone would, and that she had spent the week carrying the same cold offense I had, the way the people who tend the forgotten always do. She walked me to his room. They had not yet cleared it. There was a narrow bed, made up tight with corners a sergeant would have passed, because some habits outlive the body that learned them. There was a shelf. On the shelf, in a frame he had clearly mended himself with a strip of brass, was a photograph of a younger man in old cloth, standing in a line of others, all of them grinning into a sun long since set. And I did not need to be told it was him, and I did not need to be told the men beside him were the names the form had later crossed through with little dated lines. He spoke of them, I asked. Every day, the matron said. He had no people coming, so he made us his people, and he gave us them, the men in that photograph. He'd tell the same stories until we knew them better than he did. The flood, mostly. He'd tell the flood. She smiled at the bed. He never told it as his own bravery. He told it as theirs. You should have seen them go in, he'd say, of the men he went in to pull out. As if standing in the water up to your chest pulling strangers from a current is a thing other people do and you only watch. She touched the frame. He'd have hated a fuss, but he'd have wept to know his regiment came. He thought the regiment had forgotten him. He said so. He said, a soldier's family is the cloth, and the cloth has a short memory. I'd like, if you don't mind, for you to prove the second half of that wrong. I picked up the photograph. On the back, in a careful old hand, he had written the names of every man in the line, and under them a single line of his own. My family, taken at the river camp. The river that later took two of them and his hand, and never him. I put the frame down very gently, and driving back through the flat reed country with the light going, I understood the thing I had not understood, that I had been thinking of the question all wrong. I had thought the chapel needed someone to invent a family for a man who had none. But he had named his family himself, in a careful hand on the back of a mended photograph. My family, and the river had taken them, and the form had crossed them through, and he had gone on calling the cloth his family even when he thought the cloth had forgotten him. He was not a man with no one. He was a man whose everyone had gone ahead of him, and who had kept faith with the larger family anyway, the one too big for any form's box. The question who receives him did not need an invented answer. It needed an honest one. The cloth receives him. The family he never stopped claiming him back at last. That was the shape I sent to Holt before dawn. Saturday came up cold and clean, the sky scrubbed pale, the kind of morning the dead seem to get more often than they have any right to. We formed at 10 in the dark uniforms the sergeant had ordered, no scarlet, the color of a closed thing. And then I saw what the asking had built, and I had to look at the cobbles for a moment to keep my own face the disciplined blank we are trained to keep. They had come not 6, not a dozen. I stopped counting at 100 and gave up the count entirely when the farrier's relief arrived still pulling on their gloves, and brass came at the head of the band with the pipes under their arms, polished to mirrors, and the quartermaster walked the line of a straightening a ribbon here and a cuff there with the cloak's full kit, laid out on a board carried before him like the relics it was, the flood medal at the center, square and shining, polished by a sour man's own hands until it threw back the pale sky. Men had come who were off duty. Men had come who had traded duties to be free. A cluster of the old soldiers from a nearby home had heard, somehow, the current under the floorboards runs out past the barracks walls, and had been brought in a small bus, and they stood at the side in their own old cloth, medals out, leaning on sticks and on each other, and one of them had been at the flood, I learned later, had been one of the men he pulled from the water with the hand he later lost. And that old man had come 40 miles to stand at the funeral of the soldier who had given him the rest of his life. We marched him slow. The drums took the pace, that terrible patient pace that makes 100 yards feel like 100 years. And the pipes, when Brask brought them in, did the thing pipes do that nothing else does, which is to take the grief out of a man's chest and hold it up in the air where everyone can see that it is shared and therefore bearable. The coffin came on the shoulders of the 6 who had drawn the lots, and I was one of them, and I will tell you that I have carried that same weight a dozen times, and it has never once felt like this, not heavier, but more, as if we were carrying not a man but the proof of what a man is owed. There were people on the route. I had not expected people. But a funeral procession of 100 soldiers behind one coffin, with pipes on a clean cold Saturday, is a thing a town notices, and they came out of their doors and stood on the curb, and some of them must have asked who it was, and the word that came back down the line of watchers was the same word that had run under our floorboards. A soldier with no one, so the regiment came, and I watched ordinary people, strangers to him as we had been, take off their hats and put their hands over their hearts for a man they had never heard of until that morning, because the sight of a regiment standing as a family answered a question in them too, a question I think every person carries quietly. If it were me, with the box marked none, would anyone come? And here in front of them was the answer walking slow behind the drums. Someone comes. We are the kind of people in the end who come. The chapel, Father Holt's small gray chapel on the edge of the cemetery, with room for perhaps 80 if they were friendly about it, could not hold us, and that was the first thing the morning taught me about my own plan. I had thought of filling the chapel, and the chapel was the smallest part of it. The men who could not fit inside stood out in the cold in ranks that stretched back across the cemetery grass, bareheaded, and Father Holt, bless him, sent word that the doors would stay open, and his voice would be carried out by the men nearest, each rank passing the words back to the rank behind, so that the whole service rolled out across the gravestones in a low human echo, 100 voices saying the responses a half-second apart like the sea coming up a long, shallow beach. And so we came to it. The readings were read. The silences were kept. The flood medal lay square on the cloak, and Father Holt, when the time came, did not leave the question out. He turned from the coffin. He looked out at the chapel that could not hold us and the ranks beyond the open doors that ran back into the cold, and he asked the oldest question there is, in the old plain words, his voice steady and carrying. Who here receives this man? Who will carry his memory? Who stands as his family to lay him down? And the chapel did not fall silent. This was the answer I had found in the gray before dawn, the thing I had sent the runner to ask Holt before the sun came up. I had told him, do not let the question fall to the stone, and do not let it be answered by a crowd's murmur, which is only a softer kind of silence. Let it be answered the way a family answers, by one voice, and then by all. So when Father Holt asked who receives this man, the sergeant, who stood in the front rank in the dark and not the scarlet exactly as he had said he would, took one pace forward, one pace, the smallest movement a disciplined man can make and the largest a grieving one, and he answered, in the flat voice he uses when a thing is already decided. I do, he said, his regiment receives him. And then Brask beside him took his pace and said it, I do. And then it ran. It ran the way the word had run under the floorboards, the way the responses had rolled out across the gravestones, one voice and then a rank, and then the next rank, and then out through the open doors into the cold, where the 100 who could not fit inside heard the question pass back to them man by man, and answered it the same way, each in his own mouth, not a chant, not a chorus, but 100 separate men each saying the 2 oldest words a person can say over the dead, I do. Until the words were not coming from any one place but from everywhere at once, from inside the chapel and outside it, from the young privates and the old color sergeant and the farriers and the quartermaster with his board of polished medals, and from the old soldiers brought in on the small bus. And the one among them who had been pulled from the flood said it louder than any of us, his old voice cracking on it, I do, because for 30 years he had owed this man a debt he had never been able to pay, and now, finally, at the graveside, he could pay it with the only currency that settles such a debt, which is to stand as family for the man who stood as rescuer. I said it too. I had not planned to be able to. We are trained to carry without trembling. The glove is so the hand never shows what the hand feels, and I had meant to hold the discipline blank to the end. But when the words reached my rank, I found my mouth making them without my permission, I do. And I found that the trembling I had spent 11 years not showing was, in this one place and this one morning, not a failure of discipline but the whole point of it, that all the years of holding had been so that when a thing finally deserved to break me, I would have something real left to break with. The box marked none was a lie by 1100 hours. I had said it would be, And it was. We laid him down. The 6 of us who had carried him took the rope, and we lowered him the slow, careful way, and the flood metal went down with him square and shining. The volley was fired, 3 rounds into the pale, clean sky, and the pipes played the man home, and 100 and more soldiers and a townful of strangers and a busload of old men he had once pulled out of dark water stood bareheaded in the cold and watched a soldier with no one in his box be received by more family than most men gather in a long and lucky life. There is not much more to tell, and the not much is the part I most want set down. Father Holt found me afterward by the new grave, when the ranks had been dismissed and the men were drifting off in the quiet, talkative way men drift after a thing has gone right. "You were afraid the question would fall to the stone," he said. "It did not fall." I have asked that question over a great many graves, Corporal, and I have never once heard it answered by so many. Usually it is one voice, thin and brave. Today it was a regiment. He looked at the grave a long moment. A man's family is not always the one the form expects. Sometimes a man spends his life building one and the form simply hasn't a box for it. You found his. That is all you did. You did not invent his family. You only found the one he already had and told it where to stand. I have turned that over many times since. I think it is the truest thing anyone said that day. We did not give him a family. He had earned one 4 times over in a flood with a hand he never got back. He had a family the size of a regiment, and the form had simply been too small to hold it. All we did was fill in the box, the only honest way it could be filled. The desk did frown. Pell's office sent a second message the following week, cooler than the first, noting that an assembly considerably exceeding the appointed party had taken place contrary to the office's clear guidance, and inviting the sergeant and the corporal responsible to account for the irregularity. The sergeant went in alone first, though I had not asked him to, and what he said in that room I do not entirely know, but I know he came out and told me, "It's settled. You're not to worry it." Later, I learned that he had laid Pell's own 2 messages on the desk side by side, the entirely sufficient one and the considerably exceeding one, and had asked the undersecretary one quiet question: whether the office would prefer it recorded that the regiment had honored a man who went back 4 times into a flood, or that the office had reprimanded it for doing so. Pell, who wrote carefully, and therefore understood exactly how a thing reads when it is read aloud in 20 years, found that the matter required no further action. That was the only victory over the desk, and it was a small one, and I have come to think it was the right size. The desk was not the enemy. The enemy was the box marked none, and we beat that one cleanly, on a cold, clean Saturday with pipes. I am back at my post now. The gloves are clean. We are trained to carry without trembling, and most mornings I do, but I think differently about the carrying than I did before that Thursday. I used to think the discipline was the point, the still hand, the blank face, the angles correct. Now I think the discipline is only the saving up. We hold and we hold and we hold, year on year, in the cold postings no one writes songs about, so that on the one morning a man with no one needs a family, we have something left to give, and we are strong enough to step forward one pace and say the 2 oldest words, and mean them with a whole regiment's weight behind them. No family expected. That is what the order said on a Thursday in a flat voice. It was wrong. A man who wears the cloth is never without family. He may outlive every name the form can hold, and the box may go to none, and the world may spend him and throw the wrapper away. But somewhere there are men still standing inside the same colors, saving up their strength behind clean gloves, waiting without knowing they are waiting for the morning they will be asked who receives him. We were always going to answer. We just hadn't been asked yet. And when we were, we said, "I do."